I'm Brian Warshaw.
And I'm Jay Yaz.
And this is Comics Now. Welcome to Comics Now. I'm Brian Warshaw, and I am flying solo at the moment here to talk to you about the news. And a little bit later, we have an interview with Peter Simeti, the creator, founder, leader, king of Alterna Comics. And so really looking forward to you guys hearing that interview. Pete is a good guy with a good head on his shoulders, and nice talking about comics with somebody that clearly loves them so much. But right now we're going to jump into the news. So first up, we've got Green Lantern Earth 1 Volume 2 is going to be coming out this summer, really early in Comics Now. Jay and I talked about this book. I enjoyed it very much. A really great take on the Green Lantern, and I think probably the best of the Earth 1 books from DC. I know your mileage may vary. Some people really love that whole series, but Jay and I, not so much, but the Green Lantern book, very, very good. But the pitch here, very, very neat. So, manhunters, alien races, rings of power. It's a lot for the people of Earth to absorb, especially when an interplanetary incident forces their protector, Hal Jordan, to leave on a rescue mission that results in the discovery that there's a new player in the galaxy, Yellow Lanterns. In this sequel to Karina Bechko and Gabriel Hardman's best-selling 2018 graphic novel Green Lantern Earth 1, Hal Jordan and John Stewart must team up to save the galaxy from an invading force. And here's where it gets particularly interesting. Conscripted into service, the Yellow Lanterns are uniformly made up of inhabitants of the planet Quard, located in the parallel dimension where the Guardians fled to escape the Manhunters long ago. While they seem a benign force for peace, Jordan can't get comfortable with how much power they wield, or their bizarre lockstep behavior. When fellow Earthling John Stewart ends up with a yellow ring, he and Hal must work together to confront the being who destroyed the original Green Lantern Corps, the last surviving Guardian. So there's just some great artwork. If you guys are just listening to this on the podcast, make sure you head to comics-now.com, find our article about this. Loved Hardman's work in the first volume of this, and very, very anxious just based on these few samples to see more of it for the next volume. He's got character shots. I hesitate to call them sketches because they're a bit more refined than that, but he's got Hal, John, and then Arisia. And if I remember correctly, Arisia showed up in Volume 1 as well, but she plays a major factor in Volume 2. So very much looking forward to this book. If you haven't read the first volume, you should do it, and let us know what you thought about it. We really enjoyed it. We figure you guys probably would too. Just great visuals, great reimagining of the Green Lantern mythos, particularly how it comes to interact with the people of Earth. So more Green Lantern news. We've got decade variant covers revealed for the Green Lantern 80th anniversary 100-page super spectacular. So DC did this with the Action Comics 1000 and Detective Comics 1000, where they had decade-specific variant covers. It was awesome. I got a few of them for Detective Comics, and I don't think I got any of the decade variants for Action, and I regretted it. But really cool stuff, and some great covers here. I think my favorite might be the Nicholas Scott, and it's got all of the lanterns of our sector. And you've got, of course, Abin Sur, you've got Sinestro, you've got the original Earth Lantern, Alan Scott, and Hal, John, Simon Baz, and Jessica Cruz. I don't care if you guys don't count them. I do. Guy Gardner, gotta love him, even if you hate him. Kyle Rayner, and then the Teen Lantern. And if Jay were here, he could tell me what her actual name is, but I do not recall. But the rest of these covers are also very good. There's this Matt Taylor 1950s variant, which is probably the most striking in terms of its graphic qualities. You've got, is this the Doug Monkey? Yeah, so you've got the 60s cover, Doug Monkey. You've got the Star Sapphire with Hal wrapped up in some type of bonds. You've got Sinestro in his little blue and black costume. Very good stuff. Not totally sure who this other character on the cover is. Maybe it's an early incarnation of the Black Lanterns, though I'm not sure. I'm not an expert. Somebody's gonna correct me on that. There's a Neil Adams cover with Jon Stewart and Hal Jordan. And, I don't think Neil is quite what he used to be, but still a pretty good cover. Actually a very classic Neil Adams looking cover. So that's very nice. David Finch with Guy Gardner and a guy looking a bit psychotic, which maybe if he was wearing red, that might be a little bit more appropriate, but Guy is a little off kilter anyway, so I will allow it. I particularly love a lot of the background and atmosphere in this cover from Finch. The way that the green energy coming off of the ring looks. It's just really, really beautiful stuff and a great sense of depth, the way that this is inked and colored behind Guy as well. Really, really high quality stuff. We've got this cover here from it's Philip Tan, I believe. Yep. And this is just really like classic Lantern looking great pose. And this one's Kyle Rayner, of course. Lots of nice green energy around him and his very, very distinct mask. And then this one right here is really nice too. Unsurprisingly, Ivan Rice. You've got, it looks like a lot of the stuff from the Johns run, like Blackest Night, Brightest Day, that kind of stuff. It's got that kind of a feel to it. Yeah, really, really cool stuff. And then, of course, Jim Lee has to contribute something. And I gotta say, if you've been following Jim Lee's sketches for charity lately, man, he is delivering the goods lately. And I really like this cover as well. It's not my favorite of the batch, but it is really, really nice. And I like seeing Hal with a bit of a smirk on his face. I think that's very much Hal and very appropriate. And then this one, probably some of the more striking color work in the batch. I believe this is Liam Sharp. There's no helpful text on the front of this one. But this does look like Liam Sharp's work, especially if you've been perusing the second season of his the Green Lantern book with Grant Morrison, where he's doing the color work, and it's a more painterly style. This kind of looks like that. I'm almost certain that's Sharp's work there. So yeah, that's it. Lots of great covers for the Green Lantern thing, and you can rail against variant covers all you want. It's so tempting to buy multiple issues of these things because some of the covers are really great. I'm going to try to have some willpower. That's an intended pun, and wait until the collected edition comes out that just has the variant covers in the back, so I can stare at them back there rather than spending $30 on several of these just to keep them in my short box. So yeah. Finally, for news, we've got Marvel putting out some information about what is coming in August, and most interesting to Jay and I, of course, is the image we have here at the top of Daredevil in a boxer's robe, as you should know, but if you don't, Daredevil's father, Jack Devil Murdoch, was a boxer. A bit of a bum, one might say, but a boxer nevertheless. And there is a Daredevil annual coming out in August, and of course written by current series writer Chip Zdarsky. That striking cover is actually by Zdarsky as well, with colors by Rochelle Rosenberg. And it's a very, very nice cover. But you've also got books coming from Jonathan Hickman, Giant Size X-Men, Phantom X #1, Spider-Woman #3. Notably here, I believe, is that when we get to the cover down below, that I think Jay said she's riding on a dinosaur or something like that. Lots of Empire event books. I'm going to be honest, not really very interested in those, so I'm going to just keep on passing those by. I think if they had spelled Empire like the actual word Empire instead of like funeral pyre, I probably would be more interested, but it seems kind of cheesy. But we also do have Fantastic Four number 22 coming out, and it's an Empire sort of tie-in to some degree. We'll see. I'm going to read it because it's the FF, but hopefully it's not too drenched in the event, or hopefully the event transcends its ridiculous name and is actually quite good. Covers. Cable really looks kind of Deathstrokey here. Captain Marvel on Empire tie in here. Nice artwork on this cover. I don't really like Captain Marvel as a character or anything that she has spawned in recent years, but this is some of the better Captain Marvel artwork that I've seen on a cover or otherwise recently. It's a bit more dynamic than what we've typically seen. I like her swinging the accuser hammer there. Empire Captain Marvel, less dynamic, still a nice cover. I think it not being dynamic is somewhat the point on this one, but it's kind of cool stylistically. I do like this color scheme. I guess this is a more conventional Kree warrior color scheme, or at least according to the movie. I like that color scheme better than the typical Captain Marvel red and blue and gold. I think this looks a little cooler. Maybe because it's different. There's that Daredevil cover in all of its glory, and very, very nice. Some Jim Chung covers for the Empire books. Jim Chung style is always nice to behold. And let's see, Empire The Avengers. We've got some Man-Thing action there. Always a welcome sight. Don't know who that is. Somebody let me know. Captain America. That is wow. That is quite a cover right there. Folks, if you are listening on the podcast, I apologize. We are trying video out this week as well too, and you can always go to the site and look up the article to see the images in all their glory. But some of these covers are very striking. This other Empire Captain America one with some huge elemental beast looking down on Cap and some soldiers. It's pretty impressive as well. We've got an X-Men cover for Empire. I've got Magic, and I guess that is Angel behind her. And that's kind of a nice cover. Some tree-looking beast, possibly an incarnation or physical manifestation of Krakoa, which makes this cover particularly sinister. Interesting-ish X-Men cover with some zombified people. Another interesting one with Wolverine and others not doing so hot. Jubilee. Fantastic Four with Ghost Rider and the Hulk on the cover. An interesting look. I like... It looks like Ghost Rider has a Fantastic Four emblem on his chest, but instead of a 4, it's links of a chain, which is really, really nice. I like that. Some Spidey back there. So I think this might be the new Fantastic Four. There's Wolverine that was mentioned in the solicit text for one of these. Another X-Men cover. Good to see some AIM guys. Lords of Empire Swordsmen. Okay. Guys with swords, I'm usually on board. Evil mustaches, also on board. Celestial Messiah. Okay, that's interesting. Marauders. Oh, that's foreboding. Kate Pride in her pirate garb, lying on a pyre. And this is like the one cover in the entire batch that doesn't say Empire at the top. Kind of funny. Spider-Woman. Here we go. She's not riding on a dinosaur. She is fighting with the Triceratops. Yeah, I'm on board. I've got to read that issue, if only for that. Wolverine cover. This looks pretty rad. Very, very nice work. Somebody trying to hold him under some ice, it looks like. But man, really, really nice cover. Great detail on the figures there. X-Factor. Not as interesting a cover, certainly. I guess it depends on your taste. It's certainly well drawn. I just don't find it quite as interesting. X-Force. Okay. And then more covers as well. I don't want to bore the podcast listeners, but head to the site and check those out. And you can see what Marvel has coming up in August and what the covers to a lot of these things look like. And hopefully those will get you excited. Well, that's going to do it for the news. So stay tuned. And just a moment, I will bring you our interview with Peter Simeti. Peter Simeti, welcome to Comics Now. We've talked about things involving your company before because there are some very good books coming out from Alterna, and we've talked to some of those creators. But this is the first time that you are gracing the Comics Now airwaves. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You are very, very welcome. And so I'm assuming that most folks probably don't know a whole lot about you, even if they do know about Alterna. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about how you got into comics, when you got into comics, and how you found your way from that to doing what most people would probably consider the most insane thing possible, chain your life and livelihood to publishing comic books.
Well, that's a pretty big question. That's a lot of different things to tackle in one question. Where should I start?
You were born somewhere, and at some point you got into comics. Where and when did that happen?
I probably my earliest memory with comics is a spectacular Spider-Man issue that I still have, and I loved it. I've read it to pieces at this point. It's falling apart. Got into X-Men and Hulk and Fantastic Four, Batman, a lot of superhero stuff when I was a kid. And which I think is kind of how most people have got into comics over the years. But I just, from that point, I started just drawing the images I saw in the books, and I just loved the characters and the designs. And eventually, I mean, I was really young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, so I couldn't really read and comprehend the stories too great. But by the time that I was able to do that and not just follow along with the pictures, I really started to love the storylines and the characterizations and all that kind of stuff. I'd say probably around maybe 10 or 12 years old, I really thought, I want to draw comics. I want to make comic books when I grew up, and I really went in that direction. I loved drawing more than writing at that point in time. It's kind of a bit of both, I guess. At this point, I'm a little bit more. At least in terms of making comics, I'm more of a writer at this point than an artist. I like doing cover art and things like that, but not really much for sequentials. But at that point, I mean, it was really odd because the comic industry was kind of going through a weird time in the 90s, and it wasn't really seeming like a viable option for me. I went into the graphic design field later on for college and for work. But comics just kept kind of calling, and I still kept doing comic-related stuff on the side until eventually I just figured, I'm going to try to make my own, and that's kind of where Alterna came along. Is because of that. Is I wanted to make my own book and put it out, but I didn't necessarily want to put it out on some kind of publishing imprint that sounded like it was just a Simeti Press or something, Simeti Studios or whatever. I wanted it to sound kind of more official. So Alterna Comics sounded like something I wanted to do. I wanted it to be sort of an alternative, not necessarily mainstream or indie or anything, just good comics, and just make my own stuff and put up my own stories and see what happens from there. It wasn't really a long-term kind of goal. It was just more to get my own stuff out there. And I figured eventually maybe I'll move on. After maybe I say 6 or 8 months or so of doing that, we started getting submissions, a lot of really good submissions too. And at first I was kind of wary over, I don't really want to put out other people's books. I didn't feel like I knew enough to do it at that point. I didn't really feel comfortable with it, but we kept getting so many different kinds of people, creators sending in their work, and it was great. Oftentimes much better than anything I could do. And they all had these stories of rejection and how hard it was for them to break into the industry, and that they just kind of wanted one shot, one foot in the door. And I figured, maybe we could just start slow, and we can just do print on demand, and we can take things nice and easy and see how it goes. And, one step at a time, don't get in too crazy, and maybe it won't be so bad. Maybe we can have some strength in numbers. And that's kind of how Alterna got started. And now we've been doing this now for 14 years. So it's been a lot of trials and tribulations over the years, but here we are.
Now, was the focus at the beginning on newsprint single issues, or were you publishing some other format? What were you doing?
No, the newsprint is very new. It's I'd say it's probably since 2017. At first, we did print on demand, and that was maybe for about a year or two, and then we got distribution around 2008. And once we got distribution, I didn't think that it made a lot of sense at the time, especially for a new publisher in many different ways, a new publisher, to ask of creators to do some kind of a monthly or bi-monthly or even a quarterly issue schedule. So we switched over to just putting out graphic novels in this way. The wait time was more beneficial to the creators to get their stories out there, and it also made more sense in terms of what we could release on their schedule too, because of the fact that they had day jobs and things like that. And it would allow me to kind of still, at the time, I had a day job as well. I sometimes worked 2 or 3 day jobs, and it allowed me to also not have to just jump right into the fire. So we just did really graphic novels for the first, I'd say, 10 years or so at Alterna. And we didn't really put out single issues. It wasn't really something that, in the beginning, I didn't want to do it for various reasons. But as we started being more and more out there, I didn't want to put out single issues that were $3 or $4 or $5 a piece, that weren't kind of like the comics that I remember, which were on newsprint predominantly, with the cover stocks not being so thick or so flimsy that maybe they would fall over and collapse upon themselves. Just something we see a lot now with comics today. So I didn't know at the time, but it's a totally different printing press is what's used for newsprint. It's not necessarily that comics can't be on newsprint. It's that the printer has to be different. And most people in comics, most publishers use offset printing. And we were using offset as well for graphic novels. But every single time I would ask the printer, I figured, well, maybe it's just I have to find the right printer, the right offset printer. And they would use a thinner paper stock, but that's not the case. You have to use a different press entirely. And there wasn't really anybody to give advice about that, of who to seek out to, until around 2015 or 2016. I forget when. But I was talking to a fellow by the name of Randy Bishop, and we were talking about newsprint comics and how much we loved back in the day all the newsprint books that were out, and why don't they have them anymore? And he was like, I'm actually working on a newsprint book myself with just a local printer. And so then we started talking, and I started realizing, I need a web press printer. It's a different printing press, and they are able to use the thinner paper stocks. So since that point, we've pretty much been doing single issues on newsprint. It's I'd say maybe it was, when we started off, it was a third of the price to print. I think maybe at this point it's a little bit closer to half of the printing costs. But again, I haven't compared with the modern printing paper stocks too have risen. I don't know, but it's cheaper. It's definitely cheaper than it is to do it on the paper stock everybody else is using. And to me, it's just comics. Newsprint is comic books. There's nothing like it. It smells great. It feels great. The colors look great on it. And I really love it, and many other people love it too, which has been phenomenal for us. And I'm so glad that they're happy with the way the books look.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I necessarily prefer newsprint. I enjoy it. I don't have the childhood memories of having grown up reading newsprint comics. I started reading comics as an adult after only reading one as a kid. But one of the things that I do appreciate about the newsprint is folks who listen to our show know that I'm always railing against modern comic book coloring, and how excessively glossy and candy coated it often looks. And I appreciate that the newsprint mutes a lot of that. It presents ultimately a somewhat flatter look. I mean, obviously, you look at something like Mighty Mascots. You know, the colors in that book, there's still a lot of rendering going on. It's not just flat color, but there's none of that like layer of poly coating over something look to it that a lot of the stuff coming out of particularly Marvel looks like. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah, it could be a bit garish, especially if it's too saturated. The color it doesn't absorb really into the paper stock. And because of that, it's kind of always sitting on the surface as opposed to being absorbed. So with newsprint, it does absorb the color. It kind of dampens it a bit, and it also provides a little bit of warmth to the tones. Whereas on this really bright white paper stock, a lot of comic publishers use nowadays, it kind of can reflect a little bit too much to the viewer. It distorts the color a bit. It makes it sometimes. I've heard people even say that they get more eye strain from some of these bright white paper stocks. And it's because of the fact where the way the color is sitting on it and the fact that the paper is so intensely white sometimes. And then that's not even having to do with the coatings of the paper. That's just the paper itself. But when the paper stock is also glossy or anything like that, you find yourself kind of struggling and wrestling with the light to not have a glare hitting you every single time you read the book. But with newsprint, there's none of that. But, there's definitely a place and a purpose for those premium paper stocks that just, to me, especially when it comes to single issues, I think single issue comic books, they really should be, I think, something more, I guess, not necessarily, everyone calls them floppies, but it should have a little bit of that flop to it when they're either too rigid because of the paper stocks on the cover are almost like a card stock, or sometimes they are a card stock, or the interiors are too thick and the paper weight is too heavy, or it's the opposite sometimes. If the cover stock is the same stock as the inside, it can fold upon itself. Sometimes you might go to a comic shop and see what I call sleepy comics. They look like they're falling over and they're passing out. And, they're self-damaging product, which isn't really an ideal situation to present retailers with. So it's a very strange thing that publishers have kind of, I don't know, that they're not necessarily looking for comics that lay flat. I don't know what's going on in terms of what they're looking for with paper stocks, but I always want comic books that lay flat, especially if you have them on a shelf or if you put them in a bag and board. Sometimes you'll find that a lot of comics nowadays, they tend to bow out in the middle. And it's very strange. It's usually, that's what drove me nuts on print on demand books, is that kind of phenomenon, because of the paper stock would be a little thicker. They don't necessarily fold them and bind them with the same kind of machinery. So they wouldn't really lay flat. They always have that bulge in the middle that's kind of like bowing out. And the comic would sometimes it could flip open on itself, and it's a nightmare to stock it on a shelf for most retailers. Whereas, the comics that Alterna has and the comics that were produced for decades, they would just kind of be flat like a magazine on the rack. They wouldn't do that thing where they bow out. So I don't know what most publishers are doing, but I know everyone likes to see comics just kind of sitting there nice and flat, and they don't have to worry about them falling off the shelf.
You almost wonder, and I'm sure you've got theories on this, and we don't have to go too deep into it, but you almost wonder if it's sort of like, the demo mode for a television in a department store, where if you take the television home and you've still got it in demo mode settings, it doesn't look all that good. I mean, maybe the thicker paper stock and the gloss and all that stuff is, something designed to hopefully give the comic more curb appeal as sales have declined. Just a way to hopefully get people to buy it.
I think that's definitely it. I think it's kind of adding more bells and whistles that are very superficial, as opposed to the fact that the comic should be selling on its own merits in terms of the story, the art, maybe some graphic design, making the covers really pop. Even putting things like taglines. That's something that we do a lot at Alterna. We make sure that the cover will say something on it. It provides some kind of hint at the story or something intriguing that makes you just go, "What's that? What's that book about?" Most comics I find nowadays, it's just kind of it's like a sea of pinup shots. You don't really get a gist of what the story is for the most part, and they don't really pop. A lot of comics too have this kind of it's a very pastel looking kind of cover, and it doesn't pop off the shelf. It won't really catch your eye, and I know that really shifted a lot once pre-ordering became very predominant in the comic industry. You didn't really have to necessarily grab the reader right off the stands with a great cover, but why not though? Why not do that? Because if anything, a great cover, all I can think is all the covers I love throughout the years, and how they really still they're just awesome to look at, and they're just great, and they're iconic. And why not try to make every cover as engaging as that? I don't understand necessarily the kind of it almost feels sometimes like shame. Like you don't want people to know this is a comic book. You want to kind of trick them and make sure, oh, well, you open it up and now you found out it's a comic. I want people to go, you know what, there's text on this cover, there's images on this cover, it's telling a story. It's not a shame that it's a comic. We've got the logo in the upper left. We've got a corner box on there. It's unabashedly a comic book. It's not something that's used as a stepping stone toward Netflix. It's not something that's used to, this way you won't feel it. Maybe a little bit of, I'm not a child. I don't read comic books. Who cares? It's a comic. People love comic books. All kinds of people read them. We shouldn't be trying to hide that fact, that selling it as something that it's not. To me, that's one of the greatest things about comics is the fact that they just scream fun. And if the comic book doesn't scream fun, I don't know what the point is of making it.
No, I think that's a good point. You're talking about covers. It's great when a cover tells a story. If it's not going to tell a story, it should at least still grab you. I'm sending you something in the chat right now. A couple of years ago, I was reviewing the Red Hood and the Outlaws book for DC on Batman News. And this cover right here, it is suggestive of the story inside. But mainly it just grabs your attention. You see this cover and you're like, I got to find out what's going on there. Let me know when you can see it. But
let me see here.
Yeah, this one was a really striking one by the great Giuseppe Camuncoli. But yeah. Even if it does feature the BDSM black mask from the New 52 that I think is almost universally hated, it's still a very good cover.
Yeah. You need something that grabs you. You need something that if it's not going to necessarily hint at the story inside, it at least makes you, when you're looking through the releases on the wall, it should at least stop you for a second. Because that's sometimes all you have is a second.
Right.
And if you can just get someone's attention for just a little bit, whether it's, the layout, what's being featured, tagline on the cover, or even color schemes, we've got some great covers at Alterna that use a lot of great colors that really pop. And just anything that gets your attention, is something you should use. And if you can use all those tools, why not?
Yeah, comics as a medium is something where creators have the ability to feed a reader's imagination far more freely than really any other medium. In straight up literature, you're depending a lot on the reader's imagination, which is fine. I like books without pictures, but in film, there's obviously budget constraints if you're trying to bring something, to something imaginative to bear. But in comics, you can open up a comic book and a guy created in the space of a month something just completely different that blows your mind. and you should. I agree with you. You should be taking advantage of that capability. Anytime you put a book on the shelf, stoke people's imagination, make them make them wonder what the heck is going on inside of your book, and make them want to pick it up to find out.
Yeah, why not? I mean, if you're not going to do something like that, you're kind of leaving artistic money on the table. You're kind of really holding yourself back, and you're doing a disservice to the reader as well. I mean, if you can make it great, if you can make it stand out, if you can make it exciting, why not? Well, who sits there and puts together a cover and is like, you know what, this is too exciting, this is too fun, we need to make this boring. Can you make it more boring? Send this back to the artist and please tell them to make it dull.
Right. Yeah. It is interesting. I mean, there's so many covers of just people standing, looking straight at you, and it's like, what are you trying to convey? Like
it's a yearbook photo.
Yeah. I like to see people standing. Maybe I'll pick this up. Oh boy! So speaking of people standing and falling, and that's a good segue, or it's a segue anyway, into talking about the current situation with this virus and how the world has sort of shut down to varying degrees over the past 2 months. Shortly after states started issuing stay-at-home orders or recommendations or whatever you want to call them, Diamond obviously put out that big news that they were not going to be shipping books, and not one to rest on your laurels and let somebody else govern your destiny. You very quickly said that, Alterna is, at least for the foreseeable future, done with Diamond. We're selling from alternaaccess.com and orders directly to retailers. So do you feel like this was kind of just a nudge that you needed for something that you've been wanting to do anyway? Or was it just a matter of realizing more starkly than ever that the bottleneck that is Diamond's distribution to comic book shops is something that is not healthy for your business to be chained to?
I think a little bit of both. This is something that was kicking around in my head for at least a year and a half to 2 years in a serious way. I know everyone out there, we always get frustrated with Diamond, and we think, every other month, that's it, I'm not using them anymore. But then you go and you use them again anyway, because who else is there? But what's funny about this whole situation with Diamond in particular is that the biggest reason of why we're in a position right now to be able to self-distribute, I guess, in a way, you can call it that, to retailers and then sell also directly to readers is because of Diamond. We, over the past, let's see, so since May 2017, we've had the newsprint single issues out. Up until that point, I'd say from then to now, we lost 15 to 16,000 reorders from Diamond. They would auto cancel every month. It was very rare if we got a reorder, a purchase order. And if you don't get one, you can't send them books. You'll just see the book orders pile up. You can't do anything about it until they send you the order. So after, I'd say, maybe 4 months of that, of being really frustrated, seeing that we lost, hundreds upon hundreds, sometimes every month, sometimes we just lost like close to 1,000 reorders. And those were sales for readers, for the retailers too, mostly guaranteed sales, because those were reorders that they were trying to get on back order for books that sold out. So we set up this system where we built up sites. We had stuff that retailers could order from, the readers could get from. We had an Etsy store for, I think, about a year, and then it became just kind of, it didn't make much sense for us to be on Etsy anymore. We didn't really need the platform, so we built our own store. So now that's alternaaccess.com. And it's because of Diamond's poor handling of the reorder situation. That's why we built it. Sure, I'd rather not have to pack up as much orders as we do. I mean, I'm grateful for it and I love it, and I absolutely want to continue to have us be successful in this arena. But at the time, it really was, kind of frustrating. It was a bit bittersweet getting so many direct sales because it was a loss for the comic shops. They weren't getting the order, and it was also more time intensive on our part. But we have to get these orders out there. People want their comics. So Diamond kind of set us up in a way to be successful like this by really kind of pushing me to not just sit there and go, well, I guess we lost all those orders. What are you going to do? Instead, looking at that and going, no, well, we should sell these direct. We should open up a site. We should do what we can and service the readers that want to buy books from us. If they can't get them at the comic shop, they should be able to get them somehow. And why not get them through us? So it's kind of strange that they put us down this path. And then once everything had occurred with how it was handled, there's so many different ways, so many different things of how I felt things were kind of mishandled or just even, I mean, this was kind of a long time coming too, but even with Diamond, it seems strange to me that still it's the year 2020 and people are supposed to order comics out of a gigantic phone book. And they're supposed to kind of just sit there and wait on the comics and hand in like an order form, and it's almost impossible to explain to someone new to comic books. This is how you're supposed to order them. Wouldn't it be so much easier if Diamond invested in their infrastructure on previewsworld.com if they had a ship to store feature? So you went and you pre-ordered and you selected from a drop down what store you want this order to ship to. You prepaid for it. Pre-ordered it just like you'd pre-order anything else, and the money went to the shop. And they didn't have to worry about all this stuff with previews catalog, the order forms, not getting paid, having so many customers perhaps drop off the face of the earth and never come in and pick up a pull list. Something that's more manageable and then also easier for a lot of new people to comics. I could just say, here, go to this link and pre-order the book, and then they can get it immediately and get it right to their local comic shop, and then they can actually go to their shop and pick that up. Instead, it just seems like Diamond is the only game in town. There's no real incentive to innovate. Why should they? And the whole industry has been affected greatly by that. So it's even funny. There was a chat with Steve Jeppy, and I had posed a question. They were wondering, well, how do we get more comics into the hands of people who haven't read them, and especially kids, the young readers? How do we get them on board? And I said, well, have you guys thought about getting comics, especially the dollar reprint lines of various publishers, into Dollar Tree or Five Below or the multitude of stores out there that could have maybe 10, 20 comics and get those in there? And they're just reprints. They're not anything that you have to worry about on a monthly basis with new titles. And they didn't even realize. He didn't realize that there were these dollar reprint lines. He thought, he said, how do you get a comic for $1? He says. He's like, that's not possible. We would have to really sell a deep discount on them. And he admitted, he's like, maybe I'm showing my ignorance, but he's like, I don't think there's any publishers out there that have something like that.
You go to Five Below and you can find, 5 DC books for $4 in a poly bag.
Yeah, I've seen that before. You know, and it'd be great to see those kinds of things, because of course I want Alterna to succeed, but I want comics to succeed more than anything else. And the only way that they're going is if they get in front of new eyes. The way many, many people discovered comics was not directly going to a comic shop, especially if you don't have a parent or an older sibling or a cousin or a friend or anyone that's going to actually take you to a shop and say, hey, look around, pick something you like. It's a trip that's out of the way for most people, and you're not really going to go there unless you're already reading comics. So if you want to get new people on board, the best way to do that is to get that comic in front of new people. Now, newsstand definitely poses some kind of a hurdle. We did that for 2 years, and it was great for brand awareness, not so much for sales, because there's no accountability, but there's full returnability. So it puts you in a position where failure is more than likely. If anything, failure is the norm. It's only usually about a 20 25% sell through. So unless you're actually putting through like 1 million comics throughout a variety of newsstands, you're not really going to have any money that's coming through that justifies being on the newsstand. Now, Marvel and DC, they could probably do that. They could probably do that because, I mean, they're a pretty big company as far as what I've heard. So I think they might be okay putting a couple comics on the newsstand. But these stores in particular, for Diamond to get books out there, they really have to look past just the comic shop market. Because if you get them in front of these new readers that are out there, then they will go to the comic shops. They will want to know, where can I get more of these? And that's when they go and they find their local shop. Now, if we don't have that kind of situation where it funnels back all to the comic shops, we're going to see the situation we currently have now, where more and more shops seem to be closing every year for a long time now. When Alterna got into the industry in 2008, there were about 4,000 comic shops. Now there's about, I'd say, 1,900. There hasn't been growth. That's not growth.
Yeah.
So, cutting them in half in 12 years isn't growing the footprint of retail for comic shops.
Right.
So they have to get out there. Diamond has to do something with acquisitions, with some kind of talking to retail, whatever it may be. And then they also have to understand that crowdfunding is huge right now.
Mm-hmm.
Crowdfunding is a massive competitor to Diamond, more than anything else. Because if I look at it and I go, there's actual real situations that we've had where a book would raise, like Mother Russia raised almost $100,000 on Kickstarter. And when that book came out to Diamond, I think it didn't even hit $3,000 or $4,000 in terms of total sales.
Wow.
So, if you look at that, if you're a creator, even after Kickstarter takes their cut, even after you spend money on everything you have to spend money on for that Kickstarter, you're still probably making $50,000 to $60,000 more than you would by going through Diamond. Which if you're a creator and you go, I can't make a living doing traditional distribution, maybe we'll put the copies out there in the secondary market and treat comic shops as the secondary market. I'm not sure that that's a viable way for the comic industry to survive, though, being kind of the secondhand store for crowdfunders.
Mm-hmm.
If big creators start going, you know what, I don't need to work for Marvel and DC anymore. I don't need to work for a publisher. I can just do my own thing on here. Or if publishers like Alterna, we've been using crowdfunding for a while, so we've had a lot of creators that go through crowdfunding, and then we'll put the book out and we'll break it up, put in the single issue format. So the creators can sell the graphic novels, and then they can sell through us the single issues being broken up. So if you start having that as your main way for creators to make a living, and distribution kind of becomes a shrug, like, I don't really, you get a lot of people going, I don't really know. Do I really want to go through the hassle of distribution? Because a lot of it is a hassle. That's not a great thing for the comic industry. So the distribution part of it, they have to understand, you guys do have competition. You might not have an actual distribution company set up that's competing with you, but all distribution is getting product from point A to point B. So that's what crowdfunding does. That's what direct sales do. That's what Amazon does. If you're not going to compete and you're not going to innovate, the whole industry is going to be left behind. And unfortunately, as we see, if Diamond decides to bow out for any reason whatsoever, pretty much all the comic shops shut down. All the publishers start to shut down. Not many of them are equipped or built or even ready to handle selling product directly to retailers and readers. They got to scramble for it. They have to kind of clumsily make all these different kinds of mistakes or set up new infrastructure if they're able to. And for a lot of companies, that's not necessarily something you can do on the drop of a dime. So this whole thing, it just revealed to me how much the comic industry is just not ready and willing to actually innovate. And this the comeback movement and things like that, it's like, that's great. Good feelings are great. Positivity is great. But what's the plan? And I'm not seeing a plan other than, well, make sure you tell people. Well, shouldn't we be telling people anyway? Mm-hmm. Shouldn't we be promoting anyway? That's not much of a plan. if it's just a really ugly shirt is the way to save the comic industry, I don't know that the comic industry has much hope, to be perfectly blunt.
Well, yeah, you've got
So
to offer something different. I mean, it's having to shut down for 2 months is not a pleasant experience, but it's also an opportunity, or it should be viewed as an opportunity to reflect on what got you to the point that you'd have to close operations after a week. Reflect on what got you there and find out what you might be able to do different. You talked earlier about pre-orders and making pre-orders easier. I would push back on that and say, get out of dependence on pre-orders altogether. Because pre-orders are something that, if you take a chance on an indie book and pre-order it and you don't like it, you've probably at that point already pre-ordered 3 issues of it, because when you pre-ordered issue number 1 and you waited 2 months for it to come out, you didn't want to end up with just number 1 if you liked it. You've also pre-ordered number 2 and 3. And now you don't like number 1, and you've got to buy 2 more issues of a book you don't like when it comes in. So if you get burned on that one time, you're probably not pre-ordering many books anymore. And pre-ordering as a whole is something that it seems like it depends on, the diehards, the people who are already committed. Because what consumer in any other industry or product basically agrees to buy something that they have not seen, often not even the cover, but even if you've seen the cover, agrees to buy something they haven't seen, hoping that they will like it when it arrives months later. And this ties back into the problem of depending on only comic shops. Because if you're a comic shop, you kind of need the pre-orders to know that you're going to be able to make it. You need to know how much to order. Yep. But as a publisher, if you could put your stuff out there in greater quantities, and you take a little bit of the risk, but you also try to put out a product that you think people will actually buy, then the consumer isn't the one who has to say, well, I don't want to miss out on this if it's good, so I better pre-order it. But what if it's not good? That's probably a big reason why you got people not picking up the stuff in their boxes, because by the time most of it arrives, they already know they don't like it, and it's just not a good model. And not to mention, in my experience, relatively short experience, people who are into comics are often very zealous about spending money on comics and comics-related things without always considering first whether they are financially able to do so. And so you've got people promising months in advance to spend hundreds of dollars at a comic book shop. And maybe they're not actually able to do that when the time comes. It's just not a good model all the way around.
Yeah. So the system, it's you're never going to have a perfect system, but this one seems to just be loaded with all kinds of bad things right off the bat, and it makes it really difficult for everybody to kind of do business in a proper fashion. The pre-order system too, I find it kind of ruins the fun out of comics in a big way, because as a publisher, you constantly think, well, I don't want to say too much, but I also don't want to say not enough and leave someone kind of just shrugging as to what an issue is going to be about, especially where it's almost 2 to 3 months in advance. Usually, you can end up ruining sometimes an entire story arc, depending on if your copy isn't really up to snuff with the solicit. I would love to see a system in place where perhaps every single shop can get at least one copy for free from a publisher. This way they at least have one of everything. And then the reorder system obviously should be a lot better than what it is right now. But that's kind of asking, I think, a lot from everyone. And in terms of the concession on that, I don't see much compromise being had, especially from the publishers and from Diamond. But I would be fine with, let's say there's 2,000 shops. More shops are going to order more than just one copy in general, so it's not going to be necessarily a big issue. I tell you right now, in terms of, let's say if you go to print and you print 2,000 copies, and let's say there's going to be 2,000 or 3,000 orders on top of those 2,000 copies that would be free. It probably costs you like $200 or $300 to print those extra 2,000 issues that would be for free. So it's not really a cost issue for publishers at that point. Once you get that print run high enough, it's not really a cost issue at all. So you could just kind of give those issues away for free, one copy per store, as something to just put in there. They got it, and once they sell out, they can order more. I'm not entirely sure, though, that Diamond is set up for reorders. I think everyone, business-wise, other than the retailers perhaps, seem to really want the pre-order system to kind of stay in place, even though they really shouldn't. I think it does far more damage to them than they realize. I would love to see it go back to the way it was. I would love to see the direct market become kind of like that secondary market in a way, where they're able to get back issues and concentrate on merchandise and concentrate on really kind of cultivating this backstock of issues that aren't necessarily dependent upon them getting all the new stuff right away. They can absolutely order new issues, but in that scope of it, I think we take Diamond out of the equation and they work directly with publishers. I know a lot of retailers don't want to necessarily work with 100 or 200 publishers, let's say, but the publisher would then end up working with close to 2,000 retailers. So that's another system that also presents some problems too. I think.
Oh, sorry.
There's a lot of different things, but yeah, there's a lot of different things that can be done. But I think these conversations are kind of important to see what would work for everybody, and then we all kind of meet in the middle somewhat. I think there's not a lot of conversations like that being had, though. So I don't know if we ever will meet in the middle.
I used to work at a music shop when I lived in Virginia, and granted, music stores are probably running similar margins and having similar headaches to comic book shops, but I just look at the way that we did ordering at that shop, and our big tentpole brands, the brands that the shop officially was a dealer of. We tended to deal with those brands individually. And then lots of other ancillary products we would get from a distributor who had their big phone book catalog with all of the different things that they sold. So we might deal with, Dean guitars and, Saga instruments. We would deal with them directly. Because it made sense to. Bigger orders, why have a middleman in that particular regard? And then if we were buying pickups, strings, other things like that, one-offs that a customer would ask about, you see if you got it from the distributor. It just, to me, it seems like it would be better for a shop to just have direct relationships with DC, Marvel, maybe Image. And then if Diamond wanted to, pick up the brands that are left and distribute those, because at that point it is easier for both the publisher and the shop to be able to go through a distributor, then do that. But unfortunately, it seems like, Marvel and DC, and it's a common refrain lately, but it seems like they're less interested in proving themselves to consumers and moving to a model where they're dealing directly with the shops and are one big step closer to the consumer. It just unfortunately doesn't seem to be part of the strategy for them right now.
Yeah, I think a big part of that is they're not necessarily comic publishers primarily at this point. They're entertainment companies. So they have a lot of different media. They have a lot of different things that they're kind of concerned with, and comics don't necessarily make as much money for them as they probably not only would like, but
they could. They could.
But they could. But they could.
If
But
a book like Harry
as,
Potter could become a phenomenon, like a book with no pictures could become a phenomenon for children in the internet age, then surely a book with pictures of superheroes could really take off if there was a good strategy for getting it in people's hands.
Yeah, and it would be great. I think it would be a wonderful thing for the whole comic industry, but unfortunately, they aren't the companies that I grew up loving as a kid. They're a long way from that at this point. But that's what kind of gets me excited about the indie comics that are out there right now and the creators that are out there, because they've got a lot of fire. A lot of that entrepreneurial spirit is there. They're looking to solve some problems that are headed their way in terms of, well, how do we get these comics made? How do we get them to people? How do we get them not just out there on the shelf, but actually in the hands of readers, which is far more important than just having them sit on the shelf forever and ever. The fact that a lot of people are really going, you know what, I think I can make a career in comics. It's not the way of maybe making a superhero story for a bigger company, but I can make my own stories. I can create my own characters, and I can utilize all the different tools that are at my disposal right now and make a living out of being in comics. And that's something I think that provides a lot of hope for creators out there. It's going to take time and it's going to take work, but that's just the way it is. This isn't going to be a system where you kick your feet up and you're a rock star and you're making comics. That should never really be the attitude in general. But some people, I think they like to treat it that way, and they're generally in for a rude awakening when that happens. But those people don't tend to be in this industry for that long. I think if the comic industry had a lot more people in it who were here to stay and didn't necessarily view this as a stepping stone towards a film or a TV show or whatever else, and if it was actually, let me make the best stories I can make as a comic, I think we would have a stronger industry. I think we would have readers that were happier, a lot happier with the comics that they're getting, and retailers that were able to sell more comics as well. And the more that retailers could be successful with it, the more that there's creators out there being really excited to make comic books. The more the industry looks viable and growing, the more comic books get made, the more they get sold, the more people read them. But if the industry looks like it's constantly retracting, it's constantly shrinking, it's tougher and tougher to make a living, you're going to see this industry die out. And there's always going to be comics. There's always going to be people making them. There's always going to be people reading them. But in terms of the industry as we know it, it would be a shame to see it kind of go away. But at the same time, I mean, if people don't want it to go away, they have to start doing something about it. And kind of wishful thinking in terms of, if I tell you about comic books coming back and you tell 5 friends and they tell 5 friends, that's not enough. That's not enough. I would like to see more of the initiative of even just buying. It's not even if I buy a comic and you tell 5 friends and then they buy a comic and then they tell 5 friends and then they buy a comic, a little bit more of a focus even on that. But if they want to get some kind of awareness out there about comic books, and if they want to utilize a campaign like T-shirts or anything else, I think the biggest thing you have to do first and foremost is make sure that T-shirt looks great. Make sure that it screams comic book. Make sure that it tells people about comics and about the fact that this shirt is supporting comic books, and it's a great looking shirt that you want to wear. It's not a guilt shirt. It's not a shirt that just, when you look at it from 10 feet away, it says "come back bigger." Because that's what really pops out.
Well, it's the thing too, where it's if you want to, you're talking about a passive versus an active response, right? Like saying that you want people to spread the word via this hashtag, it almost suggests that the state of the industry is something that happened to the industry instead of something that the industry did and something that the industry can fix by doing something. And so, yes, word of mouth and telling people, about comics is helpful and good. But first and foremost, make something that people want to talk about. And there are some books being made at the big publishers that are worth talking about,
absolutely.
Not saying that there are none, but the state of the industry, it's not. It wasn't killed by a virus. It wasn't even killed by Diamond. It's if you make stuff that people don't want to read, which unfortunately there's a lot of that put out every year, even by the big two.
Get back to basics: quality over quantity, a good price point, having an economical price point too. Those dollar reprint lines, they're great to get new readers in. But oftentimes they're kind of more sold as, hey, remember this issue that you can't get that's expensive? Hey, collector, pick it up and you can read it. Those issues should be all about getting new readers in, not necessarily catering to people, on their nostalgia. So it's a very strange marketing. It's a very strange way to promote. This whole industry, I feel, has kind of a marketing and promotion problem. If we want comics to come back bigger than before, to me, let's wait on that hype campaign till everything truly is back to normal. Otherwise, let's be tasteful about it and let's just let people know, hey, comic books are coming back. Support your local comic shop. Let's be excited about it. Let's highlight books and this and that or whatever. But don't make that campaign just yet,
right?
Because you're not going to have that comeback be bigger, not for months.
Right.
So let's wait till then, and then we can have a nice big, a big kind of day to celebrate. And then that's a big thing you can point to, and you can get everybody coming back, storming the shops again, and kind of like a free comic book day sort of event. But until you have that, pump the brakes on a big hype campaign. It just kind of feels weird. But other than that, with Alterna, I love the direction that we're going in because it's been wonderful now that we get to work directly with retailers and readers. Over 200 retailers have signed on board, which is it's kind of close to how many order indie books as it is. There's only maybe I would say 300 or so that really kind of order indie books all the time consistently. So if we can get around that number, which we're slowly climbing every day, we're adding 2 or 3 more. We're almost there. I think we're at about 210 or 215 so far in terms of stores. So once we reach that point, that would be great. And that kind of replaces everything we would have done through Diamond anyway. And then also we get to sell directly to the readers. So this whole system, if anything, with us going direct has worked out wonderfully. And it's because we've had so much support from everybody involved. We couldn't have done it without them. I wouldn't have felt comfortable and confident if we didn't have people ordering direct from us so much already. But because we did, it didn't make the decision seem so frightening. We're going to be using crowdfunding efforts and all kinds of things like that in the future. So the future is pretty bright, at least the way I'm seeing it for us, and especially for a lot of indie creators out there that are really taking initiative. For the comic industry, I definitely have my concerns and my worries, especially for the retailers out there that they're kind of waiting for distribution and publishers to get their stuff together. But time will tell, I guess.
Sure. Well, let's go ahead and close out then with some questions that we've been asking our guests lately. The first 2 are kind of normal. The second 2 are a little bit more bizarre. But since you are the publisher of Alterna Comics, we'll do the Alterna edition. So all answers should be Alterna related. You will understand in a moment. So the first question is, imagine in some hypothetical alternate reality, not at all based on the real world, that the entire world is shut down because of a pandemic, hypothetically. What is the Alterna comic that you go to help you pass the time and not get depressed about being shut inside away from the rest of the world because of this virus?
I would probably say it's a tie between Legends of Log and the Mighty Mascots. Very fun comics, both of them.
Excellent. Legends of Log is just one of those things that it gets you by the title. It's like if you're not interested in that book just based on the title, then I don't really know what's up with you. The title is a big draw on that one.
Oh yeah. And if you need a survival guide at Alterna, we have 2 books that would work for that: The Wicked Righteous and The XII. Both post-apocalyptic, set in a time period where disease has ravaged the planet.
Well, there you go. So could be valuable in the days ahead. You never know. Next question is, you have contracted the coronavirus. It's not a serious case. Your lungs are not filling with fluid. The prognosis looks good, but you feel like you've got a case of the flu. You're spending a lot of time in bed, but for a few minutes a day, you sit up and you want to read a comic. What is the Alterna comic that you turn to for comfort as you struggle with this disease? And no duplicate answers.
I think the one that I turn for comfort would be it would depend upon my mood. If I'm truly looking for comfort and hope, I would say Gods and Gears. That title is fantastic.
Oh yeah,
it's an epic adventure and just wonderful characterization. Ryan Wynn and Dean Kotz do a great job. And then if I'm a little bit pissed off and I'm kind of tired of sitting in bed and tired of this disease, and I would say Voidwalker, because that character there, Parker Ingram, who's basically a hitman bonded with an ancient creature, and he's hell-bent on revenge, and he's just kicking ass, taking names, putting bullets and eating people, and all kinds of great stuff. I'd do that. I feel like I was possessed by the Voidwalker. I feel like I was meant for truly something else, and at the end of this, I would be bonded with an ancient being, and I could seek and exact my revenge on those who put me in this state.
All right, here's where the questions take a bizarre turn, and I can hear Jay groaning wherever he is when I ask this question every week. But imagine tomorrow you turn on the television and the presidential press briefing is on. It's the end of the day, and you are informed that there was not, in fact, a virus causing this shutdown, but a deranged man named Dennis, who's basically just terrorizing the entire world. And as the press briefing ends, you hear something outside, and it is Dennis, and he is trying to gain access to your home. What book do you throw out the window in the hopes that Dennis would read it and either be changed by it for the better, or so psychologically shattered that he just walks away and leaves you alone?
Well, in that state, I'm probably going to throw out the 2017 If anthology, which was a crime anthology. And it's only because of the fact that it's a very interesting book, a lot of great stories in it, but it's the thickest book we have. So if I hit him and I got him and I struck him in the right spot, I think I could knock him out.
You're going to wish
and
that
if not, he could read it.
You're going to wish you had saved that one, because here's the next question. Dennis is in the house. He's gotten past your outer defenses. What book are you chucking at Dennis to repel his attack?
Oh, well, in that the case, our second thickest book, which would be the 10 Years of Alterna anthology.
Outstanding. Well, Peter, it's been a blast having you on the show, and I certainly hope it won't be the last time. And any final thoughts or words that you want to share with our listeners, something you want to promote, and be sure to let them know where they can find you as well.
Sure. Well, they can follow me on Twitter at Peter Simeti. Make sure also to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Alterna Comics. We do all kinds of different interviews and updates and announcements and live streams and all this kind of good stuff on there. And also, you guys can go to alternaaccess.com, and that's where you can find everything Alterna related. We have all kinds of merchandise, all kinds of books, comics, everything that we've got. It's up on there. Some stuff is selling out on the daily so far. We have to look into that. I might do an Indiegogo in the future to start putting up reprint editions, but that remains to be seen. We have collector cases right now on there that the first wave of them have sold out. So we're getting the next wave in real soon. But go to that site, alternaaccess.com, and feel free to support. Check us out.
That's a pre-order worth making, by the way, too. Guys, you can get a boatload of comics throughout the year, or if you want to do a half a year or a month. Imagine getting a package full of comics periodically. It is a very nice experience. As one who has done that, I can tell you it is.
And we've got new comics right now with the printer. They are going to be shipped out. I believe they told me next Tuesday.
Excellent.
So I should have them probably early June, first week of June.
Outstanding. Yeah, very, very good to hear. Looking forward to that. Well, folks, you guys know where to find us, but just in case you don't, you can find us on the web at comics-now.com. We're posting news, reviews, episodes of the podcast go up there as well if you don't use a podcast player. If you do use a podcast player, just search for Comics Now. We're pretty much everywhere: iTunes, Google, Spotify, Stitcher. You can find us out there. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and YouTube at Comics Now Cast. And if you want to chuck a few bucks our way each month, you can do so at patreon.com/comicsnow. Every little bit helps. You guys are helping us to keep this show going and make it even better, and we appreciate it. Until next time, I am Brian Warshaw, and I've been joined by Peter, and this is Comics Now. All right.